Put your name down and see what happens.
Light Turner finds a notebook called the Death Note that has the power to kill anyone whose name is written in it. Light starts going on a crusade to rid the world of bad people, only for the number of mysterious deaths to stack up, and for him to become the subject of investigation by a mysterious detective known only as L. The Good. Willem Dafoe plays the death god Ryuk, and his casting is perfect. Unlike in the anime or manga, Ryuk is given a bit more of a purpose in this movie in the sense that when a name is written down in the Death Note, oftentimes he is the one who's manipulating the circumstances to make sure that those deaths happen. Though technically this isn't how the Death Note worked in the source material, it's a detail that I kind of liked. The iffy. There are moments in the movie that feel like they should have gotten more emphasis than they did, that they should have been more important than they were, but unfortunately it feels like this was in Death Note, so we just gotta check a bunch of stuff off the list to make sure we included everything in the hour-and-a-half runtime, which frankly is a bit short for the material given. And also in that short runtime are some details, namely rules about how the Death Note manipulates the world around it, that don't carry over properly, or don't carry over at all. Most of the absolutely essential exposition was in the movie. Some minor details were left out that don't necessarily affect the grand scheme of things. And then there are some details that aren't adapted properly, or left out entirely, that actually create logistical problems for the progression of this movie's story. The bad. I've engaged in many forms of Death Note media, and the tone usually follows something like this. Two intellectual titans playing a complex chess game with each other with morally challenging stakes. In this movie, we have a troubled teenager who gets the power to kill people on a whim, uses it to get revenge and impress a girl, grows a god complex, and then gets in way over his head. And the moral complexity, one of the defining parts of the Death Note experience, feels overly simplified and like an afterthought, to be honest. 90% of the time, the characters that are adapted directly from characters that exist within the anime don't behave as their characters would. The essential elements that make these characters, while they are present about 10% of the time, the characters are saying the things their character would say and doing things their character would do. Most of the time, it doesn't feel like what we're seeing on screen is an embodiment of the core of what these characters are supposed to be it in writing or performance. But if you separate these characters, you just judge them at face value without worrying about any of the other Death Note media that exists, their motivations and attitudes just seem really stupid and petty most of the time. Also, this movie doesn't have a very good soundtrack, in the sense that during the third act especially, when songs are playing, it doesn't really fit the emotional tone of what's happening in that particular scene. The verdict? When rating this movie in terms of how accurate its adaptation was, I would rate it close to Last Airbender, and in fact it might have been adapted even worse than Last Airbender. Prior to release of this movie, controversy was raised about the casting and the general Americanization of a traditionally Japanese property. What should have been more important, though, while those are issues, is whether or not this felt like Death Note. It did not. This is a really sloppy execution of the source material that lacks any of the emotion or the intrigue that the original material possessed. This is Detective Steve, and please, watch the anime, watch the Japanese movies, read the manga. I don't care, just please do not let this be your first impression of Death Note. The legitimate material is way better.